the Countryside Podcasts with Chris Skinner. Lots of people busy with their horses here at High Ash Farm, and I'm here to see Chris Skinner, as we always do on our podcast, and here is Chris up in a digger.
Matthew, I'm here, I'm ready to go to work.
What are you doing up there?
Well, I'm waiting for you.
A big yellow digger with a great magnificent bucket on the front.
Yes, we've got a small job to do before we actually start work out on the farm with the rest of the podcast. But
Am I right to come and ride?
Yeah, come on board, Matthew. There is a passenger seat. We actually, although we're going slow, there are actually seat belts fitted as well. There you are. I'll shut the door and keep it.
Oh, it's very tight up here. It's the first time I've ever been in a big yellow JCB.
Right. Okay. And they're very quiet, very luxurious. Everything's on like an aircraft console here with a joystick, and the joystick does absolutely everything. You can hear how quiet it is. It's very comfy. There's air conditioning in hot weather and a really efficient heater as well in cold weather, and it's articulated, so do apologise, we just bent the tractor like a banana and it goes round corners before you get there.
And we're really high up, so it's a terrific view up here.
Yes, the boom is in the centre of the tractor and we can see way up over the top of it, and we've just got a little job to do, because on this week's podcast, like 2 weeks ago, we investigated things that flower at this time of the year that you don't normally see, and that would be things like the mosses and the lichens, and we're going to follow that through on this week's podcast and kind of look at more of the things that are completely invisible. So we've just driven around a corner, and this is my pride and joy. This is a farm muck heap.
Yeah, and it's steaming beautifully. So.
Yes, it's incredibly hot. So we're just extending the boom out, and that's lifted up close to 10 feet tall. That was a ton of horse poo and all the shavings. It's a very low nutrition compost, if you like, because most of it consists of wood shavings. And the girls muck the stables out for their own horses, and it ends up here, and it's a luxury muck heap, all with concrete surrounds, and there's no spillages or leak off from it. And tipping the bucket, see, it's all done off these little buttons here, and it will go up at a terrific height, and it gets incredibly hot in there, so close to 90 degrees centigrade, so it kind of rots down this organic material into a lovely jet black compost, and the temperature in there, you cannot bear your hand in it for more than a second.
But all the steam and smoke coming off that.
I won't put you through that ordeal. I have done in the past, but we'll exempt you from that today. And one more bucket, and then we're ready to start.
So there's nice fresh stuff down there.
Yes, yeah, that's neat horse poo. Up it goes, and it will go back onto the fields on the farm. There we are. Oh, that was over a ton. We got a little beeper when, which is a safety. And this is why it's one of my favourite spots on cold days in March and early April, when the first swallows arrive. They make a beeline, so to speak, for this area of the farm, because there'll be lots of insects in there. Different species of fly lay their eggs in there, and they hatch out because of the extra warmth. And there we are, down on the ground with the digger bucket, and there are literally swarms of them flying round. The swallows know that, and because they've arrived, they're insectivorous birds. I wait for them to come every year, nearly always on time, early April. First swallows are here, and because of the cold weather, it can be, we get one of those easterly or northeasterly breezes. There's very few insects flying about, but the swallows instinctively know about this muck heap here, and I come down once or twice a day and kind of push it up like this, stir up all the flies, and the swallows just think it's the local takeaway, and all of a sudden you have half a dozen 20 swallows just swooping round in a circle. So it's really lovely to see. There we are, the tractor's just decommissioning itself. You can hear that clicking noise. It's got something called AdBlue in the engine, which helps remove any emissions coming out. So basically we've just got sort of water moisture coming out of the exhaust. It's a very efficient system. There we are, it's nearly finished.
It was my knees knocking.
Yes, yeah, there we are. Right, I will open the door and we can just go out and have an examination of what we've uncovered.
Right, I'll slip down these
There's a
steps.
nice handle to grab, that's it. Just be careful because we're quite high up.
Yeah, and there we go. Jump down. Oh, and there's the muck heap. Magnificent. It's been built up a little bit with these 1-ton digger loads that Chris has just done, but he's also got a fork here, which looks alarming to me.
A lot of modern farmers don't actually know what this is. It's actually called a fike, not a fork.
That's 5.
5 tines on it. Yes, and my father used to have one even bigger, which was for sugar beet, which had 11 or 12 tines on, and little knobs on the end of the tine so that you didn't hurt the beet. Right, if I'll spare you from this, but if I put my hand in, it is that's out that quickly.
You were in there for 2 seconds there.
Yes, it is red hot. Yeah. It is hot. So obviously,
lovely aroma as well.
Yes, it smells quite nice. It's not being funny, but you can see the steam rising. It's a huge heat source as well. So the heat is breaking it all down, and then the bacteria comes in, and you can sort of see some white filaments of fungi and bacteria which are beginning to break all this humus down. And although it's hard to believe, there are living creatures in here which are visible, and they've become very fashionable. So if I just move to the edge here, and we'll take a few forkfuls out and see if we can find anything.
I can see a worm, I think.
Yeah, could you? Yeah, that's what I was looking for. We're going down the edge here. And
lovely fresh stuff in there.
There we are.
Look.
That's a young stuff. Oh,
Just the
here,
pink tail of a worm.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5 there. Look up in here as well.
Tiny little one there.
Yes, some of them are quite large. Let's get one out. See if I can catch one. Perfect.
Oh, there we are. Lovely and pink.
Bright pink. They don't have lungs as such. This is called a brandling. And it's top-notch food for fishermen, anglers. They absolutely love it. It's also called a tiger worm, because when this one's a little bit bigger, it will have kind of orange and black stripes all the way down the body, hence tiger worm, because it looks rather like a tiger's tail. You can see it's extended itself now, and it's over 2 inches long on my hand, and it is living in here. So this is one of the things that you don't see that's hugely, hugely important. Out in the countryside, we have kind of, I'd call them pyramids, I suppose. At the top of the pyramid, we have kind of the apex predators. In the case of water situation, it would be an otter. Out in the bird world, it would be eagles and hawks. They all think they're sitting on the top of a very secure tree. And in terms of wildlife, we would have wolves, which are no longer here. They'd control the deer. They're kind of predator prey species, if you like. And so you have this kind of triangle, this pyramid, and everything beneath those apex at the top of each of the metaphorical trees, if you like, are supporting the one above. So if we look over there, just behind the trees, you can just see Norwich Cathedral. And if I ask somebody what's the most important part of the cathedral, immediately they say the spire. In my head, No, it's the foundations, the bit you don't actually see, and that's doing all the work.
And this is the foundation of the ecological makeup of this area.
Absolutely that. And without these, everything else collapses back down. So that's how important they are.
The food chain.
And why it's become popular is people have become interested in gardening. It's become a very popular pursuit. It's very relaxing, puts you in touch with nature, and people are installing what are called wormeries. And this worm, the brandling, it can cope with almost neat humus here. You wouldn't find earthworms in such a situation, but you do find these. These are the star of sewerage farms as well. They break down almost neat humus into a usable, friable earth, if you like, a beautiful humus content.
So that's a relative of an earthworm,
yes,
but it's actually a completely different species.
Completely. There are 25, so you can see they're called wrigglers as well. Look at that, it's curling and whipping itself round on my hand. It is going to go back in a mucky, because eventually this goes up onto the fields, and it will be another year before it's spread. And by that time, it looks exactly jet black. It looks like a peat substitute, but it's not highly nutritious in the soil because it's very low fertility, whereas pig and poultry manure is very different. It's very, very high in nitrates, and this is very low in nitrates, which is why we're allowed to store it like this outside. But there we are. That's quite a small example. They're 2 or 3 inch, 4 inch long brandling worms all around the periphery of this muck heap, we can call it. Some people in the northern part of the UK, they call it the midden heap, and you'll often see it on farms. So really important, and that starts our podcast off nicely, because for the rest of it, or most of the rest of it, we'll be looking at other things that you just don't see, and yet almost we're standing on them. They're supporting us, if you see what I mean. Yeah, you're getting the drift of it now.
Yeah,
so I have a funny way of looking at the countryside, I do. But
well, back goes the worm, and
yes,
back to his world of manure.
Exactly, and it's incredibly happy, but obviously it can't cope with that. I should think what I put my hand in was 80, 85 degrees C, so beyond what human's hand or flesh can stand. I'd be cooked if I was in there for more than an hour. But there we are, hugely important, and it's kind of the basics. And so as we progress through spring, we'll be gradually looking higher up that pyramid of life, and it's always nice at this time of the year. Things like the mosses and lichens, that's their time of year, and they're very ancient as well. And so worms, the kind of prehistoric creatures that first occupied the earth, and then everything else kind of developed from it. So there we are, really interesting. Just love finding those sort of things, and that's made you smile.
It has. I mean, it's a beautiful little worm, and my first ever trip in a yellow digger.
Yes, right, we've got to put it back to the workshop now, and then we're back out on the farm. So we've just got to hop back in, put that out of the way.
It's a grey February day, but just hints of brightness, and spring just a few weeks away.
I know, I'm so looking forward to it, although I like any of the seasons that we have, all 4 seasons. They're all quite distinct, but sometimes at this time of the year, winter seems to drag on and on and on forever, and I really enjoy it when you have that low sun. And for the last 2 weeks, maybe 3, the east coast of England has been absolutely covered like this blanket. It's better than solid rain and heavy falls of snow, perhaps, but it's gloomy, to say the least. So it just seems to carry on and on and on.
And we had our old friend the easterly wind the other day, and anyone who hasn't experienced a Norfolk easterly and a northeasterly, then you really haven't lived.
No, you haven't lived. My father said, "You're a sore out boy if you stand sideways, go past you." Yes. Anyway, we're out on one of the hay fields here. We've got pollen and nectar field one side of us, and then overwinter wild bird seed mix, and we've just driven down lovely row of oak trees, and these starred the sort of entrance of it was independent television, ITV, I think. It was a programme called Countrywide, and each week the programme scanned down the sort of introduction titles, scanned down this whole row of oak trees one by one, and there's about 20 here. They're all in a line. It was obviously an old hedge bank from years ago. The hedge is not there, but the trees stand there, and they're really unusual for oak trees. They've got what we call the wash boughs on them, which hang down and almost touch the ground. And every one of them, each and every one of them has got ivy on them. And they're really lovely habitat. But there's a branch hanging up there. That's an interesting. I hadn't noticed that. It's probably snapped off in the '87 gales. That's been up there a long time, and it's hanging vertically down. So we will be going under that in a minute or two. I like to live dangerously,
Right,
but
yes.
we're carrying on that theme for this week's podcast of things you don't normally see.
And you've got rid of your 5-pronged fork, and now you're armed with a different tool.
Yes, it's a spade, and so we're looking at more of those foundation species, if you like, because that's what supports everything else. And now this is another species that's come very popular, so I'm going to put the spade in the ground like that and dig some soil out, cut a nice square. Should be lovely and fertile here, and what we're looking for,
Lovely
it's
sod there.
lovely soil, very, very fertile, and I'm just looking to see if we can find our local earthworms. So here we are.
We saw brandling earlier.
Yes, we saw brambling. This is a common earthworm, Lumbus terrestrius. Sort of blunt at one end and sharp at the other end, and the sharp end is the head end. There it is, extended. So it's bigger than what you think, because it just got disturbed and it's come out of my hand, and it's virtually from one side of my hand to another. And
Hello, rat.
Rat's arrived. He's come out. He's very excited about this. Another one here somewhere, just hidden up in the soil. So very, very high population of worms on this field, because it's been grass now for best part of 20 years. So you can see the soil structure full of roots, full of humus in the soil, and that's the food stuff of these worms. And so they do something really important. I think on an acre of ground, and this little bit that I'm kneeling on is about 10 acres, and worms bring up about 10 tonnes of soil per year per acre. So quite a lot, and it's fertile soil because it usually comes from deep down. So earthworms will digest all the organic matter in the soil. It passes through them from the sharp end to the blunt end, if you like, and comes out at the other end as a worm cast. So wherever we look on the ground, we can see lots of them. Look, this is the work of the earthworm. One there, one there, one there, one there, and at the bottom of all of those will be quite a large earthworm.
And they're constantly excavating and
All
churning.
the time. Apart from in the sort of worst time of the year for earthworms is the middle of summer, perhaps the time that most people like best, and worms need moisture in the soil. Excuse me. So what they do is estivate. They go right down into the soil. It's a kind of midsummer hibernation, if you like. So there we are. That's the common earthworm. A good acre of fertile soil, particularly grassland, and particularly more over in the centre and the west of the United Kingdom. We get a higher rainfall over there. The ground is more difficult to cultivate quite often, so more pasture equals more worms, and in a good acre you can have 3 million earthworms. There's probably close to that on this particular field, although the first little sod of soil I dug out there, that's what you call it, I wasn't swearing, there was just 2 or 3 worms in that. If I went down a bit deeper, because the soil is quite cold at the moment, and the worms are gone down a little bit into the soil profile, but they'll bring up sort of soil with lots of minerals in it, and so they're hugely important, and again very fashionable. So farmers are being encouraged to do something called min-till, where you stop ploughing the soil for many of the crops that are grown. Things like cereals you can min-till, certainly peas and some of the legume species, but some you do need to deep cultivate for, things like sugar beet perhaps and potatoes. The root crops in particular like deep friable loose soil to grow in, and so you have different requirements. So really important. So farmers are now cutting out ploughing for at least 2 of the 3 arable rotations that occur, and replacing it by min-till, just cultivating the soil in the top 50 millimetres perhaps, that's 2 inches deep only, and then planting the seeds in there, and that's helping worms to aerate the soil, because you get a higher worm population. You're not turning the soil, destroying their little structures that they have, and also the worms can then aerate the soil, and it also, funny enough, the opposite to what you think, it decreases flooding because you have a good aeration in the soil. But being English, we have funny habits in our country. There's a competition at Willemstone in Cheshire, and it's run each year, and it's called a worm charming competition, where a field is set aside and you have various contributors coming with all their different methods of charming worms. You're not allowed to use chemicals of any sorts. You can use tuning forks. Some people use whistles, and the record is set, of course, by a farmer's son. And you're given 3 square metres of turf, and you have to sit there, and you usually have somebody with you called a ghillie to collect the worms as they come to the top.
You're making this up, Mike.
No, I'm not making this up. This is the honest truth. You can look it up, World Worm Charming Competition, and the record is a farmer's son. Wasn't me, but he scored 511 worms. That's the British record. And quite often people have a score of 200. But amusingly, on my lawn in the morning, sometimes gulls will wait, and I put out any of the previous night's cooking. I'm called Alfred the Great sometimes, because I sometimes burn tea and have to put it outside. The gulls wait there, but while they're waiting, they sometimes stand on the ground and splash their feet on the ground. It's like a little dance, and that brings the worms up to the top, and that's the sort of basis of the World Worm Charming Championship. I know you couldn't make it can only happen in Britain.
Do you think we should enter a High Ash Farm team next year?
Yeah, I think so, yes. Yeah. I'd have to worm my way out of that one, because I'd show everybody up, I think, yes.
Boom, boom.
Right, there we are. So we've only got a few steps to go for our next one. I've put the little sod of soil back down. I think I'll have that on my gravestone when I pass away. Under this sod lies another one.
Rat has run away from that joke.
I don't blame him. Right, let's have a look at one of these oak trees here, Matthew. Low branches, we've got to kind of duck down to get close into the trunk.
What did you call this when there's the branches?
These are
alone?
called wash boughs. Wash boughs. So they're branches that come out low on any particular oak trunk. And of course, out in the countryside, when you were ploughing with horses or later on with tractors, you wanted to get as close as possible to the hedgerow bottoms. So nearly always the wash boughs were cut off because they'd kind of wash past you, or catch on the tack that the horses had, or knock the exhaust pipe off the tractor. And funny enough, the little road on the other side there that runs down through the farm is called Wash Lane, but I think it's called A Wash Lane. I think there's an A missing from it. So let's just creep in underneath the canopy.
Here we go. Lots of ivy. Good habitat for the birds. And food as well. And we've gone right underneath here now.
Yes, and there's a bit of a giveaway here, because if you look on the ground, Matthew, lots and lots of snail shells.
That looks like they've been dinner for someone.
Yes, we have a very high population of long-tailed field mouse here, and it's a favourite food for them. I'm just going to pick one of the shells up, and you can see it's been nibbled halfway down the back, and the body of the shell is missing.
It's quite an effective bit of escargot eating.
Yes, so most of our snails hibernate under old tree roots, right down in the ground, particularly dead trees or trees that have fallen over, and it's another one of those things that you don't see. But snails just like to be kept cool and frost-free over the winter months, so they will climb up trees like this oak tree into the ivy. So if you just come round a little bit more, this is a bit of a shock for you.
Oh wow!
10,000 snails.
There they all are, hugging
on this tree. Look in here.
Hugging close to the trunk.
Can you see? Look. I'll keep coming all the way round, and it's nearly always on the north or the northeast side. I've had a go at counting them. They go up there 20 feet up the trunk. Just look, and what I'll do is I'll invite my poor neighbour, Laura Coven, to come down with her camera and take a picture from just where we're looking. If you look in there, they're not just snails against the trunk, they're snails on top of snails.
Well, they're taking advantage of all this knotted stuff from the ivy, aren't they?
Yes, just look in there. You can see you can't pack any more in, and there's the minutest ones there, about the size of a match head, on either appearance, they've got a piggyback in, and ready for hibernation.
And the patterns on the shells
yes.
as well.
If you just duck down a little bit more and come round some more, look, just look in here. It is just an amazing sight. Yeah, so I've guesstimated 10,000 just on this tree. They are just packed. Look at the patterns, as you said. There's 10 snails there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 on that one, and on one ivy leaf. Look.
It looks a bit precarious, but they're all hibernating.
They're hibernating. They seal themselves off with a kind of mucus seal, and that protects them. But what they don't like is the warmth. So that's why they're on the northeast side of this particular tree, not on the southwest. So they'll miss the prevailing winds that generally come in at this time of the year. But the most important thing is not to have the sun on them, which kind of wakes them up. So it's a really lovely way to spend the winter when the weather's like this, hibernating. And of course, yeah, they've got a lot of history, and they migrate here from the fields beside us, because these fields were used to grow sugar beet. Sugar beet on this farm was difficult to grow because the soil was quite acidic. So each year, for, or I should suppose, 8-10 years, I had a product from the local sugar beet factory. It's got a very romantic name. It's called Cantley Waste Sludge. And it's magnesium limestone. Very, very good at neutralising soil acidity. The sugar beet loved it when I was a sugar beet grower, and consequently the pH went up from about 5.5, which is pretty acidic, and my father had been using something to aggravate the soil acidity called sulphate of ammonia, which was an early nitrogen fertiliser, had lots of sulphur in it, and caused the soil to be a little bit acidic. So to neutralise all that he did and the crops that had been taken off for years and years and years, put lots of this Cantley waste sludge on and brought the pH up to about 8.5, which is very alkaline. If you're growing crops in your garden that need lime, then you'd know what I mean. It's quite sort of very sweet soil, if you like, and so consequently that's the ideal soil regime for snails, because their shells are made almost entirely of calcium. So in heathland, particularly down in southwest Norfolk, we have the Brecklands down there. The soil is acidic, it's heathland, and you don't get many snails at all because there's no calcium to make those important shells. So
Well, this is good snail country here, and they're all asleep at the moment, but a lot of those will be bird food as well.
yes, as well, because they'll go right out in the middle of these fields. And in years gone by, when I used to do radio pieces, again, I hope no local farmers are watching what I was doing. I'd come at this time of the year and visit these hibernation sites with a bottle of my girlfriend's nail varnish, bright pink, and I'd put a spot of this pink nail varnish on a snail shell. So when I was walking out on the fields to check the crops, occasionally I'd come across a snail, and it'd be 200 metres out from the trees. They go quite a distance. Snail's pace, I suppose, has come into our language. And even worse today, with the modern postal service as well, we've got something called snail mail, which delineates out sort of how the mail sometimes takes a few days to deliver, but it does make me smile. And years and years and years ago, it's one of the things my mum said. She'd send my two sisters out in early May to look for either a snail or a slug. And the reason was, she'd say, Pat, Susan, my sister's names, if you find a snail first, then you're in luck because you're going to find a man with a house, hence the snail's carrying his house on his back. And if you find a slug, well, he's going to be a little bit slow and probably not much use, and he certainly won't have a house with him. So look out for a snail first, and that'll be who you marry.
The ducks at High Ash Farm going in to roost for an evening. Hey everyone, it's Matthew here, and if you've been enjoying our countryside podcasts, we've got a small favour to ask.
Yes, Matthew. What we're going to do is to ask for a small donation to help run the podcast, and any surplus goes for conservation at High Ash Farm here. And so it's really important. We both love to keep the podcast going, and that duck agrees with me, I think.
Well, it's straightforward to donate. You can make a one-off donation or set up a small monthly contribution, and the address is highashfarm.com/podcast.
We're hugely grateful for any support. It means we can keep sharing the stories of the countryside, which I love doing each week, but it's that small amount of costs we need to cover. So thank you very much in advance.
Great advice all those years ago.
Yes.
Well, you talked about snail mail. Most of our mail these days is email,
Yes.
isn't it? And we've had a few this week.
We certainly have. And what we're going to do is just hop in the truck. We'll answer the questions, but I'm just going to drive on the top of this little hill and just have a look over the brow, and we just might have a treat.
Well, we've just been watching some birds up and down the hedge here. Not quite the amount of birds that you wanted to see, Chris, so maybe that's for another time.
Yes, I hope we'll visit this same spot for next week's podcast because we have two flocks of yellowhammers here. Their species is called buntings, and I think there's 5 members of the family, and we have 3 regular. That's why we haven't got them.
Oh, look, yes, there's a much larger bird there in that sort of naked tree, and that's going to be a kestrel.
Well done.
Yeah, you can tell by the colour, can't you?
That's why the yellowhammers are not here. The kestrel's perched up. I hadn't originally noticed that, and that's made everybody very nervous. So, yes, we've got 5 species of bunting. There's a searle bunting, which you'll see is quite rare, right down on the south coast there at Devon. The yellowhammer, which is the yellowest of all British birds with the exception of the yellow wagtail. Then there's the reed bunting, which we've got in front of us here. There's one there in the hedge with a jet black head. That's a male reed bunting. corn bunting as well, which is the largest of the species. And then quite close to where we are, along the coast there, we'll have snow bunting coming across. And my first encounter with snow buntings was I was on Winterton walking along the beach, cursing and swearing at people throwing white litter onto the ground, blown across the beach, and it wasn't. They were snow buntings, the males, black on the wings and mainly white, and they were stunning birds. They don't really breed here, but they'll come across the North Sea in inclement weather. So we hope to visit the yellowhammers, of which we have the males here, which are extraordinarily lemon yellow on their heads and breasts, and I hope to visit those next week, because these margins around the edge of the fields here are set out specially for them. But that's something to look forward to on next week's podcast.
Well, the kestrel's cleared off, so we might see a bit
we
more.
might see one. We might have a taster session. Yes.
Lauren and Adam have sent an email, and they enjoyed hearing you talking about the photograph in Birds Britannica, which is this amazing book, isn't it? All the birds of the British Isles, and all lovingly detail. And the photographs as well, and you were saying your claim to fame is
yes,
a photograph of your roof of the stable in there.
Yes, which we did as a topic 2 weeks ago, which was the lichen, Xanthoria parentina, I think, on the roof tiles, and a very proud cock sparrow waiting to go underneath the ridge tile with a feather in its beak. And I have a feather in my hat, you see, after that.
Well, Lauren and Adam say, we went straight out and bought a copy. Just so they could see your roof.
Yes, so you can see the work, the funny things I do at the farm to help the wildlife. And one of those was making 40 sparrow nest boxes under the ridge tiles of this very old, venerable pantile roof.
Here's a note from Julian Lawrence. This December, after bringing wood in from the woodshed and stacking inside for the wood burner, we noticed a large wasp flying around. Since having this unexpected guest, we've had nigh on 20. We've started looking at the logs and noticed wasps all wrapped up in their wings asleep, attached to some of them. We never had this before, apart from an odd hornet. I thought wasps died in the winter, apart from some queens which hibernate. They seem large, but surely all these aren't queens, as we found over 30 of them and had a dozen or so indoors. Are you aware of anything like this, and are they the queens?
Yes, they certainly are the queens, all of them. All the workers in both the hornet's nest, which you mentioned, hornets, and the wasp nest, all the workers die at once the queen stops laying eggs, the order in the colonies, the social wasps, dies right back down. Just the queens emerge, they mate at that time of the year in the autumn, and then they'll feed up on ivy, flowers, perhaps on rotting fruit in the garden, and then they find loose bark or in a wood pile in this case and hibernate over the winter months. Then the wings are tucked neatly, firmly onto their backs, and they'll wake up in March and April time and continue their life cycle. But probably what happened, why you have so many there, it's very fortunate because they're very valuable out in the environment, is that you probably had a wasp nest or two in the immediate locality. They stayed locally and fed up and then gone into hibernation for the winter months. But always nice to see. So almost assuredly every one of those is a queen in hibernation.
And hello to Chris Hanley, who says, I'm your occasional correspondent from the Peak District. Thought I'd share with you some observations on recent conversations you've had on the podcast, and I've attached pictures of a poor old ash tree that sadly came down last week in the high winds. A rather pretty picture of wool screw moss tortula muralis. Podcasts are inspirational, Chris, and they make me even look closer at the nature in my area. This morning, for example, I began my walk in first light, listened to the rookery, heard song thrushes, saw the sunrise, walked under a fallen ash, looked at new buds of a sycamore, looked at a heron, and walked past a dead badger before washing my wellies in a stream next to snowdrops and primroses. Well, that's a lovely note from Chris Hanley. He's in a wonderful part of the world there, isn't he?
Oh yes, just look at that, and very typically what we're seeing at the farm here, the ash trees actually snapping off right down at ground level. But just turn the page, there's another picture of the moss, the very moss we talked about on the previous podcast 2 weeks ago, and it's covered in little drops of water, and he called it a screw moss. It's got lots of names. Some people call it a pincushion moss, and what happens is the little seed heads, the little spore capsules there, unwind and then release the spores that are kept in like a corkscrew case, hence the corkscrew moss. But lovely, beautiful picture. That's good enough for a Christmas card for anybody next year.
There's so many talented people with the cameras, and we love seeing your photos and hearing about your questions as well. The email address, and the more the merrier, let's say, because we look at all of them, the more the merrier. Send your emails to chris@highashfarm.com. And we'll be back next week with another countryside podcast, and looking forward already to the yellowhammer.
Yes, hang on, Matthew. That kestrel is still stubbornly sitting in the diminutive oak tree, just eyeing up the local yellowhammers for supper. So I think we're going to be out of luck. But good luck to the yellowhammers, and fingers crossed they'll be here waiting for us for next week's podcast.